intro stuff. Debbie, do you want to go ahead and start it?
Already done. Hold on.
Good morning and welcome everyone to today's CFOLC program, Restructure, Recover, and Manage Your Remote Workforce. My name is Stacy Hall and I'm the California Regional Director for the CFO Leadership Council. We also have Debbie Dunn, Marketing Director for CFOLC on the call and helping me facilitate the session. We hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. We thank you for your continued membership and partnership within our tight-knit finance executive community. Before we get started, there's just the usual housekeeping things. Your lines are muted to avoid distractions. However, we certainly encourage your questions and comments throughout today's discussion, so please feel free to type your questions in the questions box and we'll get your questions answered as we can. If we do run out of time for questions, we'll send out the questions and the answers in our email to everyone after the program. If you are a member of CFOLC, you will receive 1.8 CPEs for today's webcast, just as you would in the live event. To receive credit, you must be a current member and answer at least 5 of the 6 polling questions. We will interrupt the discussion to bring those to you and give you a chance to answer. In order to answer the polling questions effectively, you must be logged into today's session. If you dialed in and want to receive CPEs, please hang up and use the direct link provided to you at registration. The good news is we'll send out some information on membership. If you become a member today, you will receive the CPE for today's session. As we do with our live events, we want to start today with a little shout out to our sponsors who make these events possible. I can say we've chosen each of our sponsors because we see them as thought leaders for their exclusive categories. The wealth of information they've been able to provide during the pandemic has been amazing. I can't thank them enough for their partnership. I encourage you to reach out and connect with them and connect with our steering committee members. They are such great resources for you. First off, I want to give a shout out to Bank of America. Every CFO knows the importance of having a trusted financial services partner, and CFOLC has been lucky to have Bank of America as one of our longtime sponsors. I cannot say enough good things about our Los Angeles representatives, Danny Kim and Justin Wong. They are such great advisors to our membership. Oracle NetSuite, if you've not met Carly Erickson, you need to meet her. She's the go-to person for the LA chapter at NetSuite. Members can reach out to her for cloud accounting solutions. Gallagher, there's no better time than now for CFO members to delve into risk solutions with insurance partner Gallagher. Kevin Beeks and Amy Shin can help you with anything you need. I have to say Gallagher has been such an amazing partner and has had some excellent webinars for our members during this pandemic. If you missed them, I highly encourage you to check out the recordings on our membership portal. They are just a wealth of information. So thank you to Gallagher. KPMG, whether it's guiding you through an audit or looking at the new tax changes, KPMG can help you through it. Regina O'Neill and her team, Christopher Armstrong and Christian Ridgway are there for you. We miss meeting live at their offices. Hopefully we'll be able to do that again soon. Robert Half, Management Resources. I can't say enough good things about Nicole Hill-Smith. She's been such an amazing resource for our members and for the CFO Leadership Council. Not only can she tell members how to prepare for their next advancement, but also plan for staffing changes in their business, which we know is so critical right now. Shepard Mullen, such an important sponsor of the Los Angeles chapter, and they have provided so much good information for us. Zach Turk is our steering committee representative and an amazing partner and resource for our CFOs. You want Zach in your connections, definitely by your side during these times, so they have so many resources. And then last but not least, our newest sponsor and actually our moderator for today, Mark Gervasay with Bill.com. We are so excited to add Bill.com to the team. I can tell you Mark jumped in and immediately agreed to moderate this panel, so I know you're going to want to get to know him. As I say with all our partners, you want them in your connections, even if you don't need their services right now. They are such a wealth of information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark to give us a quick sponsor highlight and then get our panel going. Thank you, Mark.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy. Good morning, everybody. This is Mark Gervais with Bill.com. And as our moderator and sponsor today, I get to give you a quick sponsor highlight about Bill.com. And if you haven't heard of Bill.com, we work with small to mid-sized businesses to automate and streamline AP. And we do this with 4 simple steps. The first is capturing all the documents to make sure that you're not searching through file cabinets and looking for mail or information stacked up on people's desks. It becomes all digitized, and then we have an AI that reads every document and captures that invoice information for you. Then it's route for approval. It's making the payment with one click, whether it's a domestic ACH, an international wire, a single-use virtual card, or sending a good old-fashioned check. It's the same payment process, easy to set up. And then the reconciliation. So taking all that information and making sure it gets into your general ledger, into your accounting system. We partner with the fine folks at NetSuite, as well as many other leading softwares to make sure that all the work done in Bill.com is in your accounting system as well. So that's I think that this is a great panel to be moderating, because Bill.com really does help businesses manage a remote workforce. And we have seen many AP departments have to go remote during COVID-19, and the process of getting bills understood, approved, and paid has been a challenge for a number of organizations, and we've been proud to help. So with that, thank you for listening to the sponsor highlight, and let's get on with the program and meet our speakers. So I get to introduce myself real quick. Let me just go back. I do want to give you some context, not just the marketing guy at Bill.com, but I am a former CPA and a former Los Angeles native. I'm up here in the Bay Area now working for Bill.com, but did grow up in Los Angeles and did my public accounting work in Los Angeles. So really pleased to be a sponsor of this chapter, and I'm looking forward to upcoming events as well as moderating this one. Let's hand it over to our esteemed panelists and have them introduce themselves. So Scott, why don't you go first?
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. My name is Scott Firestone. I'm a regional executive with Gallagher. About 20 years ago, I sold my firm to Gallagher. Gallagher is a firm with approximately 30,000 employees around the globe. We do 3 things principally, and that is brokering, property casualty, and health benefits. And as well, we're one of the world's largest claims management teams. So I want to thank Kevin and Amy for inviting me to participate today. Probably the best part of our business right now is driving knowledge to both clients and also even their competitors and our competitors. And so this collaboration, I want to commend all of you, but we're thrilled to be able to collaborate with you today, share some of the cutting edge solutions as we look to put our lives back together and put our businesses back together. So thank you.
Thanks, Scott. And up next, we have Greg. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience today, Greg?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Greg LeBate. I'm the practice group leader at Shepherd Mullen of the Labor Employment Practice Group. We have about 900 lawyers worldwide, and we have about 150 lawyers who specialize only in labor and employment. I am from Boston originally, went to Dartmouth undergrad, came out to UCLA, and I'm proud to say my son starts at UCLA this week at UCLA Law School, so he's following in his dad's footsteps. I'm out here in the Costa Mesa office in Orange County, and I specialize in advising employers on labor and employment issues. I'm also a trial attorney, and we do a lot of class action, wage and hour class actions here at Shepherd Mullen.
Thanks, Greg. And last but not least, we have Mr. Paul McDonald.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Paul McDonald. I'm a senior executive director at Robert Half, and many of you probably have heard of Robert Half. You may not know that we have about 9 brands under the umbrella of Robert Half. We're a publicly traded organization. I joined the organization after a career at Price Waterhouse between Buffalo. It's not a Chicago accent, it's a Buffalo, Western New York accent. Moved to Boston, spent my final year with Price Waterhouse in the Boston office, and then thought I would try recruiting for 1 year. At the time, we were a $40 million company. Today, we're trending towards $6 billion. Pre-pandemic, we were over $6 billion. And My role today is chief spokesperson. I have a really good role. I speak to the media, I write, I'm on webinars, help with many of the thought leadership things here. And Robert Half provides interim staff as well as permanent solutions across the globe through our 400 office network. And there's never been a day that I haven't used my accounting background. I have to say that, as I've managed operations for the organization. So it's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me. A shout out to Nicole Schmidt for offering, offering a seat for me on this webinar. Thank you.
Great. So Mark, I think we're going to start with a poll question before we dive into the actual questions. So our first poll question is for those of you that might have called in. It says, what percentage of your staff were remote before the pandemic? This is before the pandemic. Less than 10%, 10 to 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, or more than 75%. So we'll give it just a few more seconds. Looks like the bulk of you have voted, and then we'll launch and see what results we get. Okay, so it looks like, interesting, less than 10%, Mark, of the people had staff that were remote before the pandemic, which makes sense. So bulk of people did not have people working remotely before this. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mark.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Stacy. Thanks for answering that poll question. Spoiler alert, I bet you guys know there's another poll question coming up to ask you about what's happening now, as a result of COVID, since we asked you what things were like before. So thanks again, everyone, for bearing with us as we get through housekeeping and introductions. It's always a comforting part of a webinar. We kind of ease into it, but now we're going to get right into it. We've got a panel of experts, and we're here to take your questions. And I'm going to start off with a couple of questions for our panelists to warm them up and warm you up as an audience. So we're going to start with Scott. Scott, as we look at moving forward and recovering, can you talk about how your company weathered the COVID storm relative to your peers, and also add in what good decisions early on helped you navigate to this new normal?
Well, again, as I mentioned, Gallagher is a service company with a little over 30,000 employees around the world. And since we're talking to financial executives on the phone, we modeled out virtually every scenario you could possibly imagine, from an Armageddon scenario relative to massive business closures and failures and how we would react to that. And about almost 65 cents of every revenue dollar that we make goes back to the employees, because our folks, are our assets. And hence, our greatest challenge was modeling out those various scenarios as a large public company without overreacting, and no criticism, because there are no right answers in these various scenarios. And as we say, weather the storm, I hate to say it, but I fathom, and I think all of us would agree, we may be in the first wave of a long, prolonged recovery. And I think so initially, we anticipated very, short scenarios, 30, 60, 90 days. And now we're fathoming, multi-year scenarios. And I think the most important thing is that as a leadership team, we remained calm. We were very cognizant, candidly, as a large company, of our loan covenants and cash flow and receivables. And so we had a hyper focus on that. But at the same time, we remained calm. We didn't overreact. As an employee-centric business, obviously where you would focus first is what adjustments do you have to make to your own internal expenses, namely payroll, mainly health benefits. And we sat back and took more of a wait-and-see approach. We did not want to. Our great fear was that we would spook our employees, and hence the deliverable, the service we provide to our customers, would waver materially. And so, I think we got that right. We did not have radical reductions in workforce. We did freeze raises. We did freeze new hires. We always budget new hires as our business grows, but we did not overreact. In some places in the world, we did, for legal reasons, furlough certain folks. That was our only alternative. But in most scenarios, we did not reduce our workforce whatsoever. We did not cut compensation. And, you know, in many different industries, the go-to, I think, first call was, hey, well, across the board, cut, you know, 20% of comp for everybody or 15%. And again, there's no right or wrong answer, but we found that when some of our competitors and candidly some of our clients made some of those early calls, it spooked the clients, it spooked the employees, and ultimately, I think it's going to take them a little bit longer to recover. So, you know, that's just kind of the early decisions. I think we learned a lot. We learned a ton about technology. We learned a ton about the aptitude of all of our colleagues when it came to a technology standpoint, myself included. Not a high aptitude, you know, high utilizer, excuse me, of technology, and I had to catch up rather quickly. So, you know, we're learning a lot about what it takes to navigate this now and into the future.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for sharing that. I want to move on to Greg, and you know, similar question, and this is really about addressing you know, that first poll question. We saw that, you know, before the pandemic, the vast majority of attendees here had you know, 10% or fewer of their employees working remote, and you know, during the pandemic, almost every business had to send people home to work from home. So Greg, you know, what are the basic pros and cons of allowing employees to work remotely?
I've been giving this seminar on remote workforce for about 2-3 years now, even before the pandemic, because there was a trend toward allowing more and more employees to work from home. Obviously, the pros of it are, you know, it's ways to address family obligations and still be productive, reducing travel expenses. I mean, people who live in LA know it can take it an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to work some days. And actually improving productivity. There's been some studies done that show if you factor in travel time and daycare issues and things like that, you can sometimes, if you manage it properly, you can have people be more productive working from home in certain circumstances, not everyone, but in certain circumstances. So a lot of clients of mine were already doing remote workforce for a small portion of their employees. Obviously, as a litigator, I see the dark side of this. I do a lot of wage hour class actions. In fact, I do a lot of these bet the company type cases. I had a case the other day where the first demand was $150 million to settle the case on a class action because of some technical wage and hour violations. So, you know, we see the dark side of it where you have employees who are taking advantage of the situation. You know, they are not really working from home when they're supposed to be. You find them, that you get a call and you find them at the beach. So those are some of the issues. Also, just confidentiality. I mean, a lot of employees aren't properly trained in how to maintain confidentiality of documentation and client information, and they're, you know, working from a Starbucks when Starbucks used to be open, and you know, they walk away from their computer and someone can take their computer. So those are some of the issues. But we're finding even before the pandemic that employees were almost having to offer some form of telecommuting or work from home just to be competitive, because their competitors were doing the same thing and they want to attract good candidates. So those are some of the things. But you know, every employer has to balance before COVID, after COVID, during COVID. You have to balance the pros and cons of this and really do a thorough analysis of the cost of the business versus the productivity issues in order to make sure if it's a good idea to allow employees to do it. And we'll talk later about the differences between exempt and non-exempt employees, which makes a huge difference in my recommendations on how to handle it.
Thanks, Greg. So, Paul, kind of bringing this subject around, we talked to Scott about, you know, making changes, talk to Greg about some of the pros and cons. So Paul, what do you see as some of the best practices when managing a remote workforce?
Well, I would say I'll lead off with, I was surprised that only 10%, or I beg your pardon, 3/4 of you were offering, you know, remote. Less than 10% of you, you know, I think the stat said, you know, remote work was not prevalent. Because we saw it, as I think Greg mentioned, he's been giving seminars on remote work for a while, and we've been seeing it pick up in the hottest categories. Remember, pre-pandemic, unemployment was roughly 3.5 to 3.6% on an ongoing basis. And I'll be honest, with CFOs, many of you would be calling us and saying, you know, I need a data scientist, I need a data analytics person, a senior financial analyst, just to name a few. And the unemployment rate for that was anywhere from 1 to 2.5%. So we were seeing it pick up and being offered as a perk. Now it's, as we know, it's a requirement. So this has been a learning curve for a lot of organizations that we're dealing with. Number one, best practice: be authentic and be empathetic. You know, we'll talk about culture a little bit later in the webinar, but culture is so important today. We're hearing that many individuals that we poll or we're interviewing anecdotally, getting feedback, after the pandemic subsides, they're looking for opportunities. They're going to look for new opportunities because they didn't like the way things were handled during the pandemic by their organization. So empathy is what they're telling us is needed, and it seems to be a good best practice. Communication, strong communication, honest, authentic communication to your direct reports and all down the org chart. You know, you got to be lockstep with your CEO and your other C-suite executives on how you're communicating and what you're communicating. You know, yes, we've been through RIFs, reductions in forces. We've been through furloughs, and some of you have actually been hiring. Those need to be communicated honestly, authentically, and with empathy. Be flexible. Balancing what people are going, I mean, everybody on this phone, I'm sure you might hear the chainsaw out my window here because somebody decided to take down a tree just as we started the webinar. That's just one example of, you know, being flexible. There could be a dog in the background. They're balancing kids. There could be significant others or family members that are ill. So being flexible and empathetic with them and balancing what they have to go through. It was brought up earlier, technology and best practice, and we'll go into this a little bit later, but security protocols have been really important. Greg, you mentioned it at Starbucks. You know, were we prepared? How are we pivoting? The investments that were made by most organizations you know, in the years previous to the pandemic are paying off now. And then how much money do we have to invest to stay the course? And then the last but not least, this is something that I've picked up on. I didn't come up with this term, but a best practice that I've seen is tapping the rebel employees. The rebel employees terminology is one where these are the people that, and you know who they are as CFOs. These are people that tend to push the envelope with good ideas. They tend to ask questions and come to you with solutions to problems that you may not have seen or been aware of. These are the people that are getting things done right now. And if you let them loose with boundaries, okay, those people can really help you through this pandemic. So all in all, just some best practices that I can think of and that have been working. I'm sure there's more, but just off the top of the head.
I want to reiterate what Paul just said about communication. I think that is the absolute critical thing from an employment lawyer's perspective. A lot of times what happens is people run to a lawyer if they feel they've been treated unfairly in the workplace. And a lot of the unfair belief is because of lack of communication. And if you're upfront with the employees as to what's happening, the unknowns, what the risks are, I think you have buy-in from them, and you have fewer incidents of people being kind of just knocked out when they get some bad news. So I think it's really important to keep communication, as Paul said. I'd also like to get Paul's lighting guide, because I'm trying to find a way that everybody can see me without shadows on my face. So Paul, you can send me your lighting people for my next seminar. I'd appreciate it.
You got it. You got it.
I think, Greg, the trick is to eliminate the backlighting. Right? You got a great view there, but I don't know if that's helping. Yeah. Well, speaking of flexibility and bad lighting, I've been doing nothing but webinars and Zoom meetings for 5 months, and of course today no webcam. So that is talk about having to roll with it while working remote. Guys, thanks for that first salvo of Q&A. I'm going to have Stacy launch the second poll question. I think you guys know what's coming, audience, and then we'll get right back into it.
Yep, so thanks, Mark. Yes, as Mark kind of alluded to, now the question is, what percentage of your staff is currently working remote? Less than 10%, 10 to 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, or more than 75%. So I'm guessing this is going to look quite different than the first one before the pandemic. So we'll give it just another second, and then we'll launch the results. So as we suspected, it looks like more than 75% now have their employees working remotely. So yes, and so Mark, with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Yeah, with that, I can relate. I think we were all a little bit surprised at how few were remote before the pandemic, but I would say, I speak for myself anyway, not surprised at the 81% currently working remotely, especially in Los Angeles. We did, Bill.com, we did some research earlier in this year, and it was national about returning to work and speaking to finance departments. And we found in SMBs, so smaller businesses with fewer people and mid-sized businesses as well, that 60% were back to work, working back in the office at least part-time during the week. So I think it's interesting to see different parts of the country reacting, responding, recovering in different ways due to what the needs of their business. So, one of the things that we talked about earlier is just communication and making sure that there are clear understandings between the company and people working remote. So Greg, I'm going to go to you and ask you, do you recommend going further than just communication and recommend requiring employees to sign a remote work agreement? And if so, what are some of the key terms? What does this type of agreement look like?
Yeah, I strongly recommend that. I did that before COVID and during COVID. We would often draft these very detailed remote work agreements. They're probably about 2 pages, single spaced. You can trim them down a little bit, but they want to cover the main areas. During COVID, what I did at the very beginning, I was probably working around the clock. I probably worked longer hours than I've ever worked in my life in the first month or two of COVID, because I do advice work. And clients were calling me about furloughs, layoffs, remote work agreements, wage hour issues concerning converting people from exempt to non-exempt. So it was a whole range of different things. And one of the things I was doing a lot of was advising clients on converting their entire workforce, or at least 80, 90% of it, to remote work agreements. The best practice is to get an actual agreement where both the employee and the employer sign the agreement and walk through the terms. What we did was, because we were addressing large workforces, what we couldn't do was get everybody's signature right away. So we would do a memo that basically lays out the expectation, and it was basically just converting a legal agreement into a more informal written memo that went out to all employees. But I think it's very important to have a well-written, legally compliant telecommuting agreement. Some of the key terms you absolutely should have in there. You want to express that it's still at-will employment in California. You want to have the fact that the employer has the right to terminate the relationship in terms of the remote work agreement. You don't want to ever guarantee it, because if there's abuse, you want to be able to pull it back and change it. So basically, you want to expressly state this is a privilege, not a right. And if it's abused, it will be terminated. You want to define what an acceptable telecommuting location is. You don't want to say, hey, it's okay if you work from the beach or a Starbucks if you really want them working from home. You want to define the home workspace. You want to identify what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. We can talk about safety and injury and workers' comp in a moment. What are acceptable methods of communication? Is it expected that the employee will be able to pick up the phone with a moment's notice or respond to email immediately? What are the expectations? Again, communicating with the employees what they're expected. How much time is expected in the office? If you're requiring people to once a week come in the office or twice a week come actually in person in the office, if they're allowed to under the COVID restrictions, you want to define that. What are reimbursable expenses? We'll go into that in a little more detail later, but you want to define what is expected that the employer will cover and what the employee is expected to cover. Travel time pay. If you do have to come into the office or go from your home office to somewhere else for business reasons, you want to define if that's covered by pay or not. You want to expressly state that they're not on call. There's a difference between, in California, what's called controlled and uncontrolled standby time. One is compensable, one is not. You want to make sure that when the people are at home not working, they're not expected to be waiting to do something, so therefore they're all on the clock all the time. You want to address safety issues. What are the procedures if an employee suffers an injury? Whether or not the employee has homeowners insurance or apartment rental insurance that covers certain things that happen. And these are fairly complicated. I would not just go on the internet and pull up an agreement off a website. I think you should talk to your counsel about these terms. But I think it's absolutely critical, as we talked about before, how important communication is. If you don't communicate your expectations, how are employees going to meet those expectations? And work from home is fraught with a lot of abuse and risks, and I think it's important to really well define what you're expecting from your employees so they can have a roadmap.
Thanks, Greg. Greg, I've got a follow-up there. One of the things you talked about was defining the location, and I understand you certainly want people working from a professional workspace, especially in the days of being on video. A reality check here is, what if you've got young staff accountants, AP managers, for example, in your finance organization, and they're living in Los Angeles or Orange County. Chances are they've got 1, 3, or more, sometimes roommates, right? And they might have to just sit around the kitchen table at work. Or what do you do if you're me? My wife's in the next room teaching a class on Zoom. I got 2 kids downstairs taking classes on Zoom. How lenient, how strict do you need to be when it comes to defining that location, given nobody was really prepared for this?
Yeah, prior to COVID, we were much more strict about that, like really defining what is acceptable, what you need to have. You need to have a private room, the door, so you can have privacy. You need to have a phone line, you need to have a computer line, all these different things we were requiring. During the pandemic, we obviously have to be a little more flexible because you have a great, you saw the poll, 10% versus 80% change in people working remotely. But you still have the right to require the employees. Again, there's 2 different types of issues we're talking about. Our employees have to work from home because they absolutely cannot come into the workplace because of the COVID restrictions, or is this a choice? Are you allowing employees to work from home as a courtesy during the pandemic? You have to first define that. If it's required, then you're gonna have to give a lot more leeway. If it's an optional thing that you're allowing people to work from home to address some of these issues, then I think you could be a little more strict in terms of what you're looking for. But again, you have to just have a workspace that allows employees to have confidentiality, to have privacy, and to have productivity. Those are the critical factors. And if you don't have that, you need to examine whether you need to change the terms of what the work from home scenario is like, or whether you can require them to come back to work.
Thanks, Greg. That's a really, really interesting set of points. Appreciate that. I want to remind the audience, if you have some questions for Scott, Paul, Greg, clearly there's a lot of expertise on the line here, and this is a great opportunity to go into that Q&A window and start lobbing those questions in. We'll address them. While you're doing that, let me go to Scott. Scott, who should CFOs, finance leaders be consulting for regarding compliance and regulations regarding benefit plans?
Well, on the benefits side, we see this as a major landmine, and we've hosted a number of seminars focusing on Family First Act, the CARES Act, et cetera. But as this becomes prolonged, what we're finding is it's extremely important to consult with your insurance broker if they have the legal resources on staff, just as a initial understanding of what the responsibilities are, and then most importantly, seek outside counsel. One of the dangers we're seeing right now is that, and this is very serious, I can just tell you, in the last quarter, our savings, we're self-insured on the health benefit side. Our savings as a publicly traded company was almost $12 million of a decrease in claims. That we all know that that's going to come back and haunt us. We're seeing a huge increase in very, very serious illnesses, particularly heart attacks, diabetes. People just simply aren't going to the doctor. And so we believe that, in the near future, there will be protections granted to a lot of employees relative to their own health. We believe that as all of us are trying to be exceptionally empathetic with return to work plans, asking folks when and how they want to come back, protecting the privacy of that information. We have had some COVID incidences around the world, and people are eager to jump in and talk about treatment and talk about what's going on. There are voluminous laws that protect your health treatment, the privacy of all that information, how your employer interacts with you. So this is a grave area that I think folks, all of us have to be exceptionally careful of. There's the economic side of, yes, we're all saving a lot of money because we're not incurring those medical expenses, but then there's the simple wellness of our employees and our staff. I mean, right now, as a lot of folks are not getting the proper medical treatment and that they should, that there's this undercurrent of health and unhealthy people in our workforces that's going to come back to haunt us. One of the things we're really focused on with our clients is, as we look at return to work and as we give employees options and we give varying different plans city by city, country by country, is that we're cautious that we're not discriminatory or perceived to be discriminatory in any way, because we're empowering folks on a local basis, literally team by team, office by office, city by city, business unit by business unit. And there are many folks that say, wait a minute, either I want to stay home and they feel forced to come back to the workforce, or I want to get back to work. There's again, you're kind of stuck in the middle. But I would strongly encourage all of the listeners to work with internal counsel, insurance brokers and consultants, and ultimately outside counsel, to not just put out broadcast messages or share information, because we have seen a backlash as of late.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And for those of you in the audience, we're intentionally tackling some of these tough questions first. It's one thing to send a workforce home and figure things out just from a technology standpoint, making sure people can collaborate and get the work done timely and accurately, right? That's important whether you're in the office or not when it comes to finance, but there's so many other things to consider, and we want to make sure that we're helping you understand some of the complexities of what could be quite a prolonged work from home period. So thanks again, Scott. And Greg, somewhat related question. Do employers have to allow employees to work remotely due to a medical condition or disability?
That's one of the biggest issues that I've been dealing with my clients, is that an employee, they'll furlough an employee, and then they'll say, okay, now we're going to bring people back, and then employees say, hey, I'm scared to come back because I have an underlying medical condition that makes me higher risk, and I don't want to come back. I want to stay on a furlough or use my PTO, whatever. And the employers, look, we have to manage our workforce. We need you. And unless there's a legitimate medical reason why you can't return, just being afraid of COVID or just having an underlying condition is not enough to justify refusing to return to work. So what a lot of times employees will do is they'll go to the doctor and they'll get a doctor's note saying that they are unable to come back to work. And they kind of give amorphous reasons why. So we really have to be very careful. This would be like any other employee asking for an accommodation for any other medical condition, right? So you can't just say, okay, you're just doing this because you don't want to come back to work and we're going to fire you or we'll force you to come back to work. You got to really go through the good faith interactive process like you would with any other employee, saying, look, I have a disability, I have a medical condition that needs to be accommodated. You need to go through that with the worker and document it well to see.
I think we may have just lost Greg for a second there.
Oh, yep.
All right, we can come back to Greg. Paul, I'm gonna come back to you here with this question. So much of working with and onboarding remote staff relies on technology. This is very pertinent to me. I just had a new employee start yesterday. What advice can you give to CFOs as they look at technology optimizing productivity within their own companies?
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, got you.
Good. Just want to make sure I didn't freeze as well. It's a great question, and I'll go back to pre-pandemic. What investments did you make prior to the pandemic, and what was your cadence in terms of technology investment up until we had to pivot to this new world order? Pretty much that dictates for a lot of how productive people were. And it looks like Greg's back. Greg, they moved on to me.
As well, they should.
Well, it's the lighting.
Welcome back, Greg.
Yeah. What we heard and what we experienced actually with our 19,000 employees worldwide was that, we were making technology investments all along. So we were able seamlessly, I don't want to say seamlessly, quickly to pivot into the new world order. We had a great solution with Microsoft Teams that was underway, and with Microsoft really making investments in Teams on an ongoing basis, weekly, daily, they're making investments, and that's turned out to be a good platform. Why do I say that? Well, because we found ourselves going from a lot of in-person meetings, a lot of in-person trainings to remote video conferencing. How do you maintain productivity with this remote workforce? I'll be honest with you, it was a challenge because the playbook wasn't written. If you think about your business, and many of you, or any business, in a remote work environment, how do you, if you're in charge of recruiting and no one's hiring, how do you pivot those people to business development? How do you train them right away to get into business development? That's an exercise that we went through. Another thing that comes to mind in terms of how do you keep them productive is, how do we get people the hardware? How do we deploy the hardware that's necessary? Because yes, everybody had a Surface Pro or a laptop, but at the same time, we were saying, if they weren't in the office and they can't get back in the office, how are we going to get that to them? How do we get split screens to them and an external screen? Do they have Wi-Fi that's good enough to handle video? So, just a tip, and I'm sure you've seen it, a lot of people join meetings without video. The reason for that is, number one, they may not have the bandwidth coming into their environment. So the big thing for us was also the security. So we worked with our CISO and the whole team there, and they just rose to the occasion in terms of our security protocols. And again, worldwide, we've got people deployed all over almost every country working. And I remember our information security officers and his team saying, this is, not only were we being attacked every day by various, questionable organizations trying to get in behind our firewalls, but now it's even more. And they've had to, so hence, many times my camera won't work, or I have trouble logging in from where I'm at. So just a few things. I would say the thing that comes to mind too is that I'm hearing from a lot of you, the CFOs, either large company, mid, or small, cash is king. I know this is, cash is, what are we going to do to match our expenses with our revenues? If you're in an organization where the revenues kind of, fell down, and going back to what I think Scott said earlier is, can we hang on to the employees best we can? But we still have to match our expenditures with the revenue that's coming in. I've heard from a lot of you that you continued the investment with technology. You found the capital to invest in technology in order to make it through this, but also to thrive, because this could be steady state. This could be the new normal after this pandemic. As we've chatted about, I think remote work is here to stay. It's just a question of what functional roles can you afford to have external, wherever they may be, and what necessarily needs to be in the office. And then that gets into the whole question of how much real estate do you need to continue on. So just a few thoughts.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I think we could probably do an hour just on technology alone that CFOs and finance teams need to optimize productivity. I want to point out one of the things the pandemic has brought onto finance teams is a lot more fraud risk. Unfortunately, just checking the headlines, we see Amazon was recently the target of some invoice fraud. And we're seeing, ransomware continue to be on the rise. Business email compromise is higher than ever, as people are maybe just sitting around, carelessly clicking on links, forwarding emails, or providing information that they shouldn't be, and falling prey to business email compromise scams. So definitely something that finance teams need to be aware of and vigilant, and all the technology in the world is not enough to overcome human error and human nature. So make sure you're going back to communications and helping your teams understand how to be safe while working from home. Greg, I want to go back to you because you got cut off. Wanted to make sure you got your points made and across to the audience about the working remotely and return to work issues when it comes to medical conditions and disabilities.
Yeah, I'm not sure when I got cut off, but it wouldn't be the first time I spoke to an empty room. Probably won't be the last. So one of the things you want to obviously ask yourselves are, like I talked about, is you want to go through the good faith interactive process like you would with any other accommodation. First, you ask, did the employee provide a doctor's note that requires remote workforce? Can the job be effectively done at home or remotely? Does the job require regular interaction with supervisors or coworkers? What's the expected length of time of this particular leave? Is it short-term, permanent, indefinite? And temporary work from home status may be required as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA, and the FHA. So you want to take a look at that. However, indefinite, long-term leave like that is probably not going to be required, but it's going to be definitely a fact-intensive analysis. One of the problems that a lot of employers are having now is that they're saying, look, we did this at the beginning of COVID because we had to. Now we don't want to. We really want people back in the offices for productivity issues. And the employee comes and says, well, I still want to be out for an accommodation. And the employer says, well, it's not a reasonable accommodation. We don't want you to. And then the employer says, well, how can it not be a reasonable accommodation when you just accommodated it for 2 months? So the fact that the company has a history of allowing it because of COVID is going to make it harder to argue that it's not practical or not a reasonable accommodation going forward. So you want to really document all of the interaction with the employee. And if it's truly an unreasonable accommodation, you're going to need to prove that. And it's going to be harder to do if you already allowed it for a period of time. If you can show lack of productivity or inability to do the job, that's going to be important to document those things. And I want to pick up on something that Scott said earlier about discrimination issues. We're getting a ton of lawsuits already on this issue where employers have furloughed a number of employees because of COVID. Now they're bringing people back, and they're being very selective on who they bring back. And I'm telling my clients, like, you got to go through that just like you would do a layoff. You want to do your EEOC disparate impact test. You want to make sure there's no illegal reasons why you're selecting people over others. We're already getting a number of lawsuits saying that the COVID layoff and the return to work was discriminatory. In fact, that they picked people that were in protected classes not to bring back, and they're bringing back the younger workforce or white workforce, things like that. So you got to be very, very careful of avoiding a discrimination claim. And employers are being cautioned not to use COVID as an excuse to get rid of what they consider dead weight employees. You got to go through the same analysis you would if you were laying off people for any other reason. So be very careful about that. We're already seeing, I have 4 or 5 lawsuits already that are COVID related, saying that COVID was an excuse to get rid of group of workers that were protected.
Thanks, Greg. Really important points. You know, I'm sure many of the attendees never knew there was so much complexity when it came to remote work, and I'm hoping there's some good questions out there. So, one, everybody, you know, lob in your questions. We're ready for you. I've still got a few more prepared. Stacy, why don't we do our third polling question?
Yes, we'll launch that right now. So let's just quickly. Once given the all clear, what percentage of your staff do you plan to have still work remotely? So is it less than 10%, 10 to 25, 26 to 50, 51 to 75%, or more than 75%? So this would be after we're given the all clear. So we'll give it just another second and go ahead and launch that one. So it's pretty split, actually very evenly split. The biggest one is 26 to 50% at 26%, but we've got 16, 21, 16, 21. So looks like very split out there.
Yeah, I'm curious about this one, seeing, you know, sort of this nice even distribution. If that is a result of more people deciding they like working from home, or if it's a real estate issue where you want to make sure there's more physical distancing within offices, and you know there's less capacity, and you're allowing more people to work from home. I'd be curious if you want to chat or even put in a question in the form of an answer. Why you think that the future is going to look so much different than where you were just a few months ago, and even different from where you are today. I'd be interested to hear some of the attendees' reasons for this shift in the number of staff that are going to be working remotely in the future. So go ahead, and I won't call on you. I am curious to know. I think it'll make for an interesting discussion. All right. So Scott, this is one that probably applies to many on this call. And what resources and advice do you provide clients that have multiple locations for when it's time to return to work?
So this is one area where technology, I think, is really a big technology that we've used for many, many years, but the new technologies that are being built around data and analytics that are out there. And I'll just give you the best analogy. Our product is called IGAM Prism, and we've utilized this tool for well over 20 years to map hurricanes, tornadoes, major weather events, earthquakes, et cetera. And effectively what we would do with that technology is we'd map out all of our clients' locations, and then we'd go through various hypothetical scenarios of impact of those events to their facilities, and work with them to push work to different areas, different undistressed areas, even truck routes, railroad routes, shipping routes, all sorts of various different scenarios that you would go through as a major enterprise. And we're taking that down to the really kind of the most simple business. And we're mapping out all these various different data points by location, predicated on all these things we've talked about, for many, many months, which is hospitalization rates, illness rates, death rates. Now we're adding new data points, which is return to school by school district rates, which obviously is a big driver around when we might ask some of our colleagues to come back to work. Then what we're doing is looking at redundancies, or where business can be pushed around to various locations throughout the country, as an example, that may not be as effective, or around the world. I was on a call with our team this morning where we're pushing some of our accounting business to our Auckland offices because they're back in full force in business, versus in Europe, we're starting to see some spikes, and we're starting to see some really distressed businesses. So I will tell you, I think this is really going to be cutting edge information as we look at what I'll call go, no go, and then stay, don't stay. And what that means is we're all at some point going to get back to work. And at what point do we start to think about, well, we know that when the populations come back together, when we run into our flu season here, we know the scientists are telling us that there will be an increase in infection rates. But at what point and what planning are we going to go through when we have to say to ourselves, no go, or we can't stay, we've got to return, and keep the credibility and trust of our colleagues and our customers. So to the technology that's out there today, and you can get that technology from various resources where we think ours is the best. Obviously, that's a little propaganda for you, but I will tell you that our largest customers down to our smallest customers are saying, hey, look, I'd like data-based, fact-based information on a real-time basis, multiple times a day, to help me make decisions on why would I send Orange County office back to work before I'd send a Los Angeles office back to work. And what we're seeing, one new data point that was inputted this week, which I think is fascinating around the country, is number of tests that are down versus number of positive tests. Not picking on the state, but Texas as an example, maybe this is an environmental or cultural situation in their society, but fewer and fewer people are refusing to even get tested. So they've totally dropped off the map relative to their population of folks that are getting tested. Well, that's concerning. So we're driving what other data points, and we're using school districts, and we're using restaurant reopenings, and we're using employment numbers to drive, hey, look, we don't want to run back to the office. We don't want to run back to the manufacturing plant prematurely, because the cost in doing that, the cost in, I was just looking at the data that was presented on the last question, the cost of having half your workforce at home and half your workforce at the plant or office could be tremendous, could be an extreme overload on our executive teams as an example. So those are complexities that I think we have to navigate, but I really do believe more and more data around this. And there's another question follow-up, but the most important takeaway of this call today is collaboration. I would implore all of you to work together to ask questions, whether it's consultants that you pay or don't pay for, whether it be a counsel that'll give you at least some lead information, but most importantly among your peers. Talk to your peers on what they're doing, what they're thinking. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I want to share some data points. Bill.com and CFO.com surveyed finance leaders recently. We're going to publish this study in a couple of weeks. We essentially asked, how do you feel your teams are doing now that they're working remote when it comes to getting the work done timely, getting the work done accurately? And a majority said it was just fine, right? Maybe 50, 60%. I don't have the exact data in front of me. But that means there's a pretty significant minority that wasn't happy with it, with timeliness and accuracy and the challenges of working remote. So when it comes to collaboration, I think one of the things you can do as a finance leader is just ask your team, what is it taking now that was different than before? Working it differently or longer or harder to get the finance work done accurately and timely? What has changed? Because I think sometimes CFOs make the mistake of assuming everything is fine because the work is done, right? There's sort of a binary outcome. It's either done or it's not done. But it's good to check in, take the pulse, and work collaboratively to make sure that things are not spiraling out of control, all in service of getting the financials done, getting the monthly close done, getting the bills paid, getting the revenue in. Okay.
I might add on that too.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
You're striking a chord with me because it's leadership and management style that's needed. And we talked about this earlier with empathy and being authentic and frequency of communication. It's all those things that I think we take for granted when we're all under the same brick and mortar, location. And that, we walk down the hall, did you get the S1 done on time? Now we've got technology investments, collaborative tools. SharePoint comes to mind for us, where that combined with great leadership and management style is being tested. And if you have those, I think you're seeing the results of your survey coming through and saying, yeah, okay, productivity hasn't waned. But I think it's testing others that don't have those moves and need to flex those muscles more often.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's an important theme throughout the day is this communication and collaboration. I'm gonna shift gears a little bit because I want to give Greg a chance to tell the story. It's sort of a loaded question because in our prep he shared an interesting story. Greg, how do employers protect against injuries and workers' comp claims for remote workers? And can you talk about workers' comp as it relates to COVID-19?
Sure. Well, under both federal OSHA and Cal OSHA, employers are required to provide a safe workplace. And if you allow employees to work from home, you have to make sure that the home office is safe as well. So, I mean, you have very little control over what's going on in the home office, but you have to make efforts to show that you made an attempt to make sure that the workplace was safe. So one of the things we were telling clients before is to have some kind of home inspection. It doesn't have to be a live inspection, but just have, if you're allowing the worker to work from home, to tell them to take a photo of the workspace and just email it in so you have it on record that you were doing your due diligence and checking to make sure there was no exposed wires, there was nothing, no dangerous situations there. You also want to check on, make sure they have ergonomic seating would be an issue, adequate desk space and supplies, smoke detectors, things you normally would provide in a workspace. You want to at least go through the checklist and make sure that the workplace is safe. And again, one of the things you want to do is to check if the worker has either renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance that would cover any kind of injuries. One of the things you want to do also is look at whether or not there's a reporting responsibility or reporting procedure for if there's a injury at home. If they get injured in the workplace, it's pretty clear, there's witnesses, people can see, you go down to HR, whatever you need to do. When it happens in the workplace, employees can say, well, I didn't know what the procedure was. I injured myself and I didn't tell anybody because no one told me what to do. So you want to have real set procedures on what to happen. You need to properly investigate injuries in the workplace just as you would in the workspace. Now, obviously, it's going to be a little different because you're not going to have access to the home like that. But, a report from the employee, what happened, when it happened, were there witnesses, photos, things like that. Keep a file on those things. So if there's ever a workers' comp claim down the road, you can have evidence to support it. So again, if an employee is injured in the workspace, it could potentially be a workers' compensation claim. And there's a famous case, Sandberg versus J.C. Penney, that the court decided in favor of an employee who tripped over her dog while working at home. And the company said, look, I mean, if she was in the office, she wouldn't have her dog with her, so she wouldn't have tripped over. But the court said, look, if you're allowing employees to work from home and there's a dangerous situation in the home and an injury occurs because of it, that is potentially covered under workers' comp. So you got to really be aware of that this is an issue. Don't think just because the employee's working at home, there's no risk. There is still a risk there. So you got to go through the same procedures. Now with COVID, the issue is going to be whether or not there's going to be proof of causation. If someone comes to work and gets COVID and they're claiming that they contracted COVID in the workplace because the employer was not providing proper safety protocols, that's a potential workers' comp claim too. And there's obviously going to be a big battle over causation. How do you prove the employee caught it in the workplace versus at home or out in the world? And that's going to be an issue. So you got to be aware of making sure you're tracking your safety protocols, you're documenting things, you're doing employee testing, you're following the CDC guidelines on testing and documenting it, so that if there is an outbreak, we have defenses that the employer did everything they could within their power to prevent this type of injury from occurring in the workplace.
Greg, just to add there, one of the major decisions that's weighing on return to work is the issue relative to COVID-19. If you get ill at the workplace and then you take that illness home, there is a sub-coverage inside of workers' compensation where the employer can be held liable for transmitting that disease into the home. And so that's a trace liability one that's obviously very, very serious, but that's something that, decision makers are keenly aware of and watching closely relative to exposure. And we saw this with a number of meat packing plants in the Midwest that had, COVID outbreaks, and then that translated to major outbreaks at home, and the employer had to cover those expenses well beyond just health insurance.
Thanks, guys. I've got one more question before we do another polling question. This one's for Paul, coming back to you, Paul. And this one's near and dear to my heart. Many companies still need to hire during these remote times. Bill.com is one of them. How do you successfully interview, hire, and onboard new employees?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, and we started in on this, and we saw a number of things happening right at the start of the pandemic in March. I remember this succinctly. First of all, industries that we're seeing, banking and mortgage, construction, real estate development, healthcare, some manufacturing, retail, especially online, and telecommunications. And we're seeing positions in demand. Again, you as CFOs have a multitude of functional areas reporting to you, but obviously finance, accounting, technology in many instances as CFOs, as well as HR. But we're seeing demand in all those. Phenomena that I remember pre-pandemic, it was 3.5 to 3.6% unemployment broad-based in the United States. What we're seeing right now is, number one, define, is it going to be 100% remote in the future, or is it going to be a hybrid approach, or is it going to be on-site at your location? So best practices, do that first with HR, because that can dictate a number of things. What we're seeing, if it's 100% remote or it's a hybrid, we're seeing companies drop the geographical boundaries and allow people that, first of all, the rec might have been open for a security analyst or a FP&A specialist. Those individuals might be located in the Inland Empire, have a 2-hour commute to your location, and it's okay to have them 100% remote today, or 4 days a week remote. And when things get back to normal, hopefully, they'll come in 1 day a week. With the collaborative tools that are out there today, that's something. So defining what that role is going to be in the future will really open up your aperture of available candidates. Number two, it's easy. I don't want to say it's easy. I take it for granted after doing this for over 36 years, but to gauge technical skills. Are they a fit? Have you defined the technical skills? Just assume that you and your team have the appropriate, requirements, job requirements that are not soft skills, technical, functional role defined. And you can interview for that. You can check the boxes. You can, go through that. Really, the other side of that is, what do the non-technical skills look like? What do the soft skills look like? How do they communicate with you? Are they going to be a strong cultural fit with your organization? What do they bring to the table that can raise your organization up? Now, again, as you move up the org chart, that becomes a little more important. If you're just trying to get AP done, AR, if you're trying to get some collections done, yes, those are important, but I think the technical side of it might take precedence. Have multiple team members video conference these people, not just you. Meet with them multiple times. It's easy to do a 15 to 20 to 30-minute check-in today. I'm finding that I don't have commute time. We were joking before I don't know if we were joking, but we were comparing notes. Many of us aren't on airplanes any longer. I used to spend 70% of my time out of town. Besides my wife getting used to seeing me again, we're getting to the point where I have excess time. So if I start my day typically after a commute or an airplane day, airplane travel at 9:30, I'm starting at 7 or 6 sometimes if I'm dealing with other time zones. So you can find the time to interview. And so onboarding, after going through that, the soft skill gauge, by the way, integrate behavioral questioning. There's been much written on this, and that's great to see somebody's critical thinking skills and see how they're going to be a cultural fit for you. And there's many things on roberthalf.com that might be a benefit in that area for you. So I would just say it's counterintuitive for many of the companies that we were talking to in the early part of the pandemic that to hiring, but once they got to, over the panic and they got into what are my critical needs? Yes, I had to furlough some people. I had to reduce others, but I had this rec open for 5 or 6 months that's necessary. And I now have an increased appetite to look outside the area because these people are going to be 100% remote in the future. And last but not least, I would say, look at boomerang employees, individuals that may have been reduced from another organization that you've stayed in touch with, and they could come back in with little startup time and training. They could make a huge impact right away. And that could come from, people in your network, or you could talk about it with your management team and have them bring in individuals back in. There's a lot of movement right now we're seeing with governments. I didn't name that as an industry, but governments and people that have don't know how to, they haven't deployed all the CARES Act loans. And we've been seeing a large uptick in the need for auditors to go out and help them, and also people to help them deploy that cash. So just a few things that are on our minds when it comes to interviewing and onboarding. We could talk about that for a bit, but it's nobody had a playbook on how to onboard during a pandemic, and many have gone through it with good help from their HR departments.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to give you guys a quick breather. Stacy's got another poll question for the audience. We'd love for you to participate. We're learning a lot from you. Go ahead, Stacy.
Yep. So this one is, how has the remote working model changed your company's productivity levels? Hasn't changed. Productivity levels are down. Productivity levels are up. So hasn't changed. They're down or they're up. So we'll do this real quick. And I think we have, Mark, we have about 20 minutes left. I know we're probably not going to get through everything, but so we may just launch some of the other polling questions in the background just to keep things moving after this.
Yeah,
so much...
I think so. There's been some good audience questions and some good a good agenda we already had. So yeah, we'll push through and get a few more of these answered.
Okay, sounds good. It looks like it hasn't changed. Productivity, most people, 61% hasn't changed. So it's interesting. Good news.
Thanks, everybody, for answering the polling questions. Greg, I want to go back to you because you had hinted at this earlier. Differences between allowing exempt versus non-exempt employees to work remotely. If you allow non-exempt employees to work remotely, what are some of the risks? And, I think since we are trying to get all these questions answered, maybe just some of the highlights here.
Yeah, I mean, I could do an hour on this, but I'll keep it short. I mean, prior to COVID, I would tell employers it's a high risk to let non-exempt hourly employees work from home. I was telling them limited to exempt employees because you don't have to worry about all the headaches that go with non-exempt hourly employees. But the key things are obviously tracking time. How do you track their time when they're at home if they're non-exempt hourly employees? We recommend sometimes having a device added to their phone that tracks their whereabouts and tracks the time they work. They can enter their time on their phone. If you do have them use their phones for work, you got to reimburse them for a portion of that cost for that phone. We'll talk about that in a moment. The thing about controlled versus uncontrolled standby that I talked about, you want to make sure employees know when they're working and when they're not working. And unless they're actively working, they're not sitting at home waiting for work, and that's important. So also the critical thing is meal and rest periods. I mean, we get class actions all the time. That's one of the key questions we get or key claims we get in these class actions. There's always some kind of meal rest period violation in there. And you want to make sure that you give them the policies on when to take meal and rest periods, that they confirm in writing they got those, that you're checking on them, that they are taking the meal and rest periods. We tell employers to require their non-exempt hourly employees to log off for a period of time from their computer and shut off their phone so they're not interrupted during that time. And you want to make sure they're taking it at the right time. You don't want a late meal period because that could be a violation as well. I've had my clients use certification forms that employees fill out both for people working at home and in the office. Every pay period, they fill out a very short verification form saying that they got their meal and rest periods, they didn't work off the clock, they've been tracking their time correctly, things like that. We also use meal rest period violation forms that employees, if they have missed the meal period or rest period, they have to fill it out in order to notify the employer why they missed the meal or rest period. So you can pay that penalty, but then discipline the employee if they're not following company policy and intentionally triggering a penalty there. So don't use auto deduct systems for meal periods. That can be very dangerous. And you want to revise your meal and rest period policies to comply with the new law. There's new laws on rest periods and meal periods regarding whether employees can be, for rest periods, whether employers have control over where they can stay. You have to let employees, even for rest periods, leave the workplace if they want to. One other thing we talk about is travel time. If people are traveling for work from home rather than from the office, you got to determine whether or not, if they're driving from their home to a client or a work site other than their regular workplace, what portion of that, if any, is compensable time. So be aware of that too. So those are kind of the highlights, but there's a whole raft of issues regarding allowing non-exempt hourly employees to work from home to make sure you're not violating wage and hour laws.
Thanks, Greg. And to the audience, if you've got some more specific questions on that for Greg, he's ready to answer. Greg, let's just continue because you brought it up already. What about reimbursements? Do employers have to reimburse employees when they work remotely? And if so, assuming so, what type of expenses?
Yeah, under Labor Code Section 2802, employers have to reimburse employees for all reasonable expenses in doing their job. And of course, obviously, you can't pass on your operating expenses to the employees. So when you're allowing employees to work from home, if you're allowing them to do that, even if it's required by COVID, you have to cover their expenses that they normally would. So you're talking about things like cell phone use, home internet access, laptops, pens, papers, things like that. Anything you would normally provide them in the workplace, you should either provide it to them or reimburse them the reasonable expenses of it. One of the big issues that we hit on all the times in these class actions is cell phone use. There's a case, Cochran versus Schwann's Home Service, where the court recently ruled that even if the employee has a cell phone that has unlimited minutes on it, so there's no added expense by using it for work, the employer must provide some reimbursement for the use of that cell phone, even if they only use it for a limited time for work-related things. So I always tell my clients, look, if you're requiring employees to use their cell phones for any reason at all, even if it's to make one call a day or check in on your email on your phone, it's required, you should reimburse them from some small portion of that. If the average phone bill is $80 or $100, pay something. Even if it's $5, $10, $20, something a month to cover it. Because if you get hit with a class action and you have some payment, then it becomes an individualized inquiry as to whether or not that was reasonable or not, and then it's hard to certify a class. But if you provide zero payment, that's an easy class to certify, and they get their attorney's fees and interest and penalties if you don't do it. So that's the big issue. I think the biggest one is cell phone use, and you need to reimburse some portion, even if it's a small portion.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for that follow-up. I want to reach out to Stacy here again. Let's launch our fifth poll question. We are in the home stretch of the webinar. I want to make sure we get a chance for everybody to participate.
Sounds good. And this one is just, who are you consulting, if anyone, for back to work plans? So we're consulting our insurance partner, we're consulting our legal partner, we're reviewing CDC and WHC guidelines. We put together an internal task force from several departments, all of the above. This is just taking a look at who you're consulting as you can look at bringing your employees back to work. So give it, go ahead and launch. And it looks like all of the above was 53%. So bulk of the people are using all of those things, which is great to hear.
All right, thanks, Stacy. So for our audience, we got one more poll question we'll get to before the bottom of the hour here. I've got a couple more questions for our panelists and a couple that have come in from you. So I think this is a good question from the audience. So Scott, I'm going to paraphrase here. Scott, one of the benefits of the CFO Leadership Council is the ability to collaborate with peers. Just kind of share and commiserate. What do you find that competitors are collaborating and sharing ideas regarding COVID challenges?
Yeah, when I was invited on this call today, I thought if there was one seed I could leave folks with that would resonate, and I think we have some phenomenal examples to share with you, and obviously all of us are witnessing today. But if there was one area, it's collaboration. When we look at what sports teams have done, look at the NBA, look at MLS, even look at Major League Baseball, it's remarkable how they've shared information, what's working, what's not. And that's what's going to propel our business society forward. Another great example, and literally the survival of a massive part of the industry is the entertainment industry. We're a leader in film and television and live events around the world. And I'm finding that artistic community is so collaborative. There's shootings going on, filmings going on all around the world, and they're talking about what's working, what's not, what type of testing, antibody testings, tracing. Now, the challenge here is obviously the competitive spirit of all of us. This is a time when I would challenge everybody to put that aside And if something's working, I mean, I've challenged my team. I mentioned our Eigen Prism risk mapping. I've said, share that with anybody. If we're doing a risk map in New Orleans, share that risk map with anybody. Share our webinars for free. I don't care. It's because knowledge at this point in time is absolute power. Now, what's the biggest challenge? Personal privacy. All of you that have an iPhone, you probably don't even know this, but there is on your iPhone embedded right now COVID tracing. You can turn on COVID tracing. There's phenomenal technologies that are going to help us get through this. Because if, God forbid, I came down with the illness today, I should be able to push a button, or my doctor should be able to push a button on my phone, and it would tell anybody that's been in contact with me who has that same tracing turned on, right? It'll tell anybody within the last 30 days that's come in contact with me. So there's all sorts of privacy issues. There's all sorts of civil liberties issues that we're going to have to set aside if we're going to navigate this together. But I will tell you, this collaboration, we're seeing great examples of various industries. And I would challenge all of you in your own industries, reach out to folks that are, you know, consultative to you, but also reach out to your peers if something's working for you, particularly in local demographics. So that's just my big takeaway for the day, is if there's anything that we've learned, is there's some great examples all around us that are actually working.
Good, thanks, Scott. So Stacy, let's do our last polling question, and then I'm going to go back to our panelists for some final bits of advice.
That sounds good. So the last one's a quick one. Are you considering altering your real estate footprint? Yes or no? So are you looking at what's going on right now and bringing people back? Are you looking at altering your real estate footprint? This is our last one. And give it just another second. And it looks like 69% said yes, they are going to alter their real estate, or looking at altering their real estate footprints. So not too shocking, I don't think.
I do think it is going to be interesting to see the state of commercial real estate in the coming 6 to 18 months. If this is any indication. So sort of in conclusion mode here. Yeah, I've heard a couple of main themes today from our panelists. First of all, there's kind of a 3 C's, right? There's this concept of communications and over communicating, culture, letting culture be an important driver of success, of engagement. And then this last one is around clarity. We've heard so much about all the things that finance leaders need to consider as they're leading their companies through this pandemic, through this remote work. So, clarity in policy, clarity in expectations, clarity in communications. The other thing is attention to detail. I've certainly learned a lot here from Greg and Paul and Scott on all the things to consider when it comes to remote work. And hopefully all of you learned something new as well. There's more to pay attention to now as people are remote than ever before. And so we feel for you, we sympathize, and I know that all 3 of these guys are happy to continue the conversation with you after we're done here if you have follow-up questions. So I'm going to go down the line here. Scott, Paul, and Greg, one piece of practical advice for our attendees that they can take back with them after we're done here today. So Scott, why don't you go first, then Paul and Greg.
Try to listen first to your clients, to your colleagues. That's what they're looking for. I think all of us are so eager to jump in with answers. And obviously, we just have no idea what's going to play out and for how long. So try to listen to what your colleagues' needs are, what your clients' needs are, and then don't be afraid to take a pause and come back with an answer at a later time. We're finding, the folks, and I'm not going to say anybody got it wrong, but the folks that are challenged are the ones that jump the gun. They jumped the gun on whatever their plans are. They wanted to be the spokesperson for the industry. Those are the folks that I think, kind of missed a great opportunity to sit back and kind of catch their breaths and see what their action plan would be.
Thanks, Scott. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, to summarize one thing, I might double dip here. Take care of yourself. We haven't talked about that. We're in the, 5th month? This isn't easy stuff as CFOs. This isn't easy stuff as C-suite executives. Take care of yourself, whatever that means. physical activity is just the lifeblood, especially, to just keep us all moving. But second is culture. Culture is king. I said cash is king, but the tone is at the top. You set the culture, it attracts, it engages, it retains employees, and they're looking for you to set the pace. And they're gauging you right now. Yeah, they're thankful to have a position right now if they're employed with you. They're hopeful if they're furloughed that they're going to come back because they need the wages, they need the employment, but they're looking for you to set the pace. And a good CFO that's healthy, a good CFO that's leading the charge and setting the pace on the culture is going to be the leader for the future.
Thanks, Paul. I really relate to that one about taking care of yourself as well. Thanks for that reminder. And Greg, some closing words from you.
Yeah, I think what's critical is that employers take a deep breath before you make a big decision. I've had a lot of clients rushing to make decisions before they had all the facts. And like I said before, communication to employees. It's all
We lost Greg again. I'm gonna come back to Greg as soon as he's back. This is a bummer. We're so close. Stacy, I'm gonna turn it back to you for some wrap up and final words, and then if we get Greg back, I want to give him a chance to continue.
I think I am back. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, Greg.
I don't know what's happening here. I'm wired. It's not even wireless today. But so finally, just communication. You want to communicate to your employees the decisions you're making, why you're making them, and if you're upfront and transparent with them, you're less likely to run into employees who are disappointed and run to a lawyer rather than run to look for another job somewhere else. So communication is critical.
Greg, thank you. I'm glad we got you in under the wire there. Thanks again, guys. Stacy, why don't you help take us home?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much to Scott, Paul, and Greg. Your insights were incredible. There's so much content. I think we could talk about this forever. A special thank you to Mark for jumping in and moderating today. I will send out a follow-up email with some information that all the speakers are providing you that I think will be also a good resource based on all the things we talked about today. So I'll send that out afterwards. Thank you. I want to just thank everyone for being involved. I know we're getting close on time. I do want to let you guys know for LA, our program next month on September 22nd is the implicit bias of finance. And we know for CFOs, for many CFOs, HR reports into them. So workforce diversity starts at the top of that's been a theme today, but studies have shown that supporting diversity supports the bottom line. So I think we have some amazing speakers lined up. So I want to let you guys know about that. I'll put that in the follow-up email, but and we'll also send out some things on membership. So I think those are my main closing thoughts. And I just want to tell everyone thank you, and we will get some information out to you. So I think with that concludes our presentation. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.